Welcome everybody to the Brian Fultis Behavioral Finance Podcast. You know me by now. I am Dr. Brian Fultis, and by day, by trade, I am an associate professor of finance at Butler University in Indianapolis, Indiana, and this is my Behavioral Finance Podcast. Not to be mistaken with my job. This is a separate thing, and I'm here to teach you all about behavioral finance for free on YouTube or on any streaming podcast. And today we are going to finish out our final introductory podcast. Now, of course, this is, I believe, number 18 podcast, and we have set out originally to come up with the overview of what I normally teach, laying a foundation in the most comprehensive way that I can do, at least convey over the summertime on a podcast-like format. And that's the final piece today. And I'm looking forward to concluding this part and moving into the classroom next week. I've had a wonderful summer, new house, new wife, wonderful time here trying to build this podcast and my consulting business over the summer, and now I'm excited to teach to a live classroom more times than not and get feedback interacting instead of speaking to my computer. And anyway, I'm very excited about that, and I'm also excited about rolling out even more content for this particular podcast, creating a bigger purpose and vision for what we're going to be working on, and really doing more direct dives into particular content, bringing on guests, and really trying to grow the base of this. But we're laying a nice foundation. We're working out some kinks with audio and presentation and getting comfortable sitting in my office speaking to my computer, which I thought I would have been there over the pandemic, but it's getting better over time and doesn't seem like I'm totally insane when I'm sitting in here talking to my computer for hours at a time. Anyway, today's topic is talking about debiasing and some education and client management. So I'd like you to think about everything we've talked about and how we can help ourselves with making better decisions and understanding what we've learned so far and then applying it. And then also taking what we've learned and helping our family members, our friends, our clients, if you're managing people's money, and trying to provide some sort of framework for what we've already done, but to lay it out and to give you a reason to remember what we've talked about and to override it in order to get you to that better decision. So I'm just going to jump right in. Thank you for watching today, and I appreciate your support. And if you could, please make sure you subscribe and like and hang on, because we're going to continue to roll out new content. And also, if you're listening on a podcast, I would love it if you could drop some feedback. That's how we can grow this audience and have more people have the opportunity to learn about behavioral finance and make better decisions with their money, because Lord knows we all need that kind of help, myself included. I'm right at the front lines of that. So anyway, as I said, we're going to get going today. We're going to look at the steps to take to eliminate bias. So there are 4 steps here. We've already covered this in this course. And I've been doing this every time I would bring out, we did a whole section on heuristics and biases. And anytime we would lay that out, I was more or less following these steps to make you, number 1, aware of the bias, introduce the bias, this is what it is. And then number 2, give some motivation as to why this is important or how this can be problematic in our decision making. And then hopefully provide a little intuition, why we think this way, and why it's a systematic thing. That's why we call it a bias, because there's some sort of systematic way of thinking that's happening. That's how we can call it a bias. And then give you the ability to overcome the bias. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head, we had the momentum or the hot hand effect. And the hot hand effect was a misunderstanding of random samples. So we create patterns when patterns, really, it's just randomness that's happening. But in our minds, we are systematically trying to make patterns because that's what we want to do to make sense of things that are actually just random events. So the hot hand effect is if somebody makes 2 or 3 shots in a row, we believe they're going to make that 4th, 5th, and 6th shot because they're hot. They're on a roll. Let them keep going. And so being aware of that bias gives us the idea of, look, we have to understand this goes back and forth with our type 1 and type 2 way of thinking as well. Type 1 is that automatic. Type 2 is the adult in the room that sometimes has to step up and say, wait, not so fast. You need to overcome this. And so type 1 is where we go, oh, yeah, well, I see a pattern here. He's on fire, so he's going to continue to be on this streak. And the type 2 has to come in, and this is where the direction and magnitude and then the ability to eliminate or overcome is type 2 stepping in going, no, wait a minute. I remember learning about the hot hand effect, and we have to understand that if they're a 30% shooter, the next shot is going to be it's closely related to 30% than it is to the last 2 or 3 outcomes. That's the type 2 way of thinking that needs to step in. And that's why we've learned about this. We've learned examples. We also learned, the gambler's fallacy, which means we predict the pattern and then we believe the opposite is going to happen because somebody is due for a hit, or if it's been on black at the roulette table, red is due. Once again, it's this misperception of randomness, and we have to override that and go, wait a minute, no, this is my type 1 way of thinking is taking me there, but that's not true. Type 2 has to step in and overcome that and understand that this is all randomness that's happening, and you can recalibrate that way. And there are other biases, and it's a little bit more complicated on some of them. And I'm going to give the example. Of course, this is my favorite bias of all time. If you've been listening to this podcast, heard me go on and on talking about the exponential growth bias. And this is our tendency to think about compound savings growth in linear terms when the 8th wonder of the world, as Albert Einstein says, is compound interest. You get that to work for you. That's why you see Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger at 96 and 92 years old, their wealth has grown. They've had time on their side for many decades now, and you see them accumulating wealth. They're just building this through compound growth. Now, what we try to do to eliminate our tendency to think in linear terms is I actually took this into the lab, the experimental lab, because I wanted to know, first of all, if I gave you the actual equation, which is, remember, future value equals present value times 1 plus our rate of return to the time power. And we did that example. So if we have $10,000, actually, let's write this out just because, it's nice to have another crack at this. And here's my proposal. I'm going to set up this, and I've got to do the math on this anyway as we're going on the fly. But I feel like this is important because, you know what? I think I did talk about this in the other podcast, Getting Married, and trying to get people to understand that if you have a $20,000 wedding, and I know some of them, they can go higher. I'm just throwing out $20,000 as a number. But if you could barter with your in-laws or your parents, write us a check. Each set of parents write a check for $10,000. and you take $2,000, book a flight, whole week's worth. So you just take 10% of that 2,000 and leave the rest 18 grand. Just leave the rest at 18 grand. And let's say you're 25 years old when you do this, and you're going to leave this in and you just take that $18,000, leave it in S&P 500, SPY, leave it in an ETF for 30 years. And historically, if that's going to earn 10%, here's our setup. It is 18,000 times 1 plus 0.1 to the 30th power. Well, if I'm punching that into my calculator, I go using math, or what is this? The higher order of math. 1.1 to the 30th power to the 30th power equals 17.45 times 18,000 gives me $314,089. So that $18,000 would grow to $314,000 by the time you are 55. What if we did 65? Just let it grow to 65. That's 40 years. So now we're going to go 1.1 to the 40th power. $45.26 times 18,000, and we get 814,000. So just shy of $1 million after 40 years, not even doing anything else with your savings or any other transactions. There's a nice wedding gift if you want to take it. So there's one way of learning how to overcome the exponential growth bias. Learn this, and I hope I've done it. If you've listened to my podcast, you should know how to make that calculation and apply it, and not just listen to anybody else who's showing you those numbers. Number 2, I thought, you know what? This formula is not for everybody, but I still want to teach the concept. What about if I teach a simple rule? So this is called the rule of 72, and it teaches the same thing. And it says that you take the time and multiply it by the interest rate. And so I'm going to say, what would be a good, I'm going to say 12% and 12 years. 12% and 12 years. We said we're going to multiply those together. So forget the decimals, we're going to come up with 144. 144. 12 times 12 is 144. Now the rule of 72 says how many times would your amount double? So you take that amount and divide it by 72. So 144 divided by 72 equals 2, and that works out nicely. And that means whatever number that we have originally is going to double approximately 2 times. And so if I have $10,000, that becomes $40,000 approximately over these 12 years. And then you can see if I wanted to change my number of years to 24 years, it is going to become 288 divided by 72. So it's going to double 4 times. 1,000 or 10,000 becomes 20,000, 40,000, 80,000, 16,000. And you can see how that would work. So that's called the rule of 72. You might have heard it before. I had heard it before and thought it might have been more well spread. I tested this in Germany and nobody had heard of the rule of 72. and out of about 300 participants that were undergraduate students. And then I went and tested it at UCLA with another couple hundred students. And out of all of them, all of the 200 students, I believe it was just 2 people attempted to use the rule of 72. And based on their answers, they didn't even use it correctly. So we've got formal education, doing the actual formula. Mental shortcut, that's number 2. And we've learned that the mental shortcut is not really sticky. People aren't remembering it very well. And so then we tried a third way and said, let's go the opposite direction from these formulas, and let's just provide an interactive chart. And so we made a little chart that says, here's how your money would grow. Just go ahead and tinker around with your amount of time that you want to invest and the interest rate that you believe you can earn, and then just see how the chart interacts. And then we asked people after that to make estimates based off of particular interest rates and number of years. And we saw that actually they were pretty decent. And there was one problem, though. We found really good results initially. We also found really good results when we brought them back. And when we brought the students back, most of them, even these really smart German students, couldn't remember the formal formulas. And so their answers got pretty wishy-washy. Those who got the experiential learning, seeing the interactive charts, were more accurate. But they didn't like the experience because they didn't like the fact that they didn't know for sure. The students who got them all wrong, that got the formula, didn't like they loved the experience, but they didn't have good results. So we had some mixed feelings here. But what I concluded is that each person is now going to have a different learning preference. Some of us will just be totally fine learning the formula, and if we apply it with enough consistency, we can use it and be accurate over a long period of time. Those who don't are going to be more benefited by using the experiential learning tools. All of this to say, it's complicated sometimes to get in front of the right kind of way to overcome your bias, but we also just need to know who we are, and we also need to know what our preferences are and how we learn and what we're more comfortable with. So we're going to get into that in just a moment here. But before we do that, you've seen that in this, what I was just talking about, that if we give somebody a learning on how compound interest works or anything financially based, and we give them, even if it's 3 weeks time off, a lot of that learning is forgotten. The next question then becomes, when do we step in to eliminate this bias? And the old school way of thinking was financial literacy. Give a financial literacy course or a personal finance course, and once we can bless somebody as totally financially literate, then we expect them to never make a financial mistake again. And we would expect fully rational decisions from these individuals. And what we found, though, is that financial literacy, based on its formal definition, doesn't actually drive behavior and make better savings decisions. There's knowledge, and then there's behavior, and there was a disconnect from just teaching financial literacy. And what we found in the studies that we've done is that, we give somebody a learning, but by the time it's come to make a financial decision, even if it's 3 weeks down the road or if it's 3 years down the road, they're going to have forgotten a lot of it. We're back at square one. What we've proposed then, as maybe a more effective way, is what we call a just-in-time learning. You might have heard of the old manufacturing, just-in-time manufacturing. Something is purchased, then you make it right away, so it's not sitting on the shelf. Well, this works with financial learning when it is time to make an important financial decision, whether it's a savings decision, retirement decision, or a house purchase. That's when the learning should happen, right at that moment, and the learning should identify the biases that are involved with that decision. And this is where I've thought a lot about helping people make college decisions. By the time they reach campus and we tell them how much it's going to cost to go to Butler for the next 4 years, it's pretty much too late. They're already on campus. They've already committed. Now they just have to roll it out and try to deal with it in the best way possible. What I really would like to do is try to get that just-in-time learning back when students are juniors in high school, when they are looking at different options, and try to give the power to the guidance counselors and to parents about here are the costs involved, here are some rough estimates about what you're going to make when you graduate. So now you have this cost and benefit analysis. At least you have some numbers to work with. And some people need to realize that you could go and do an art major and work as a barista to be an art major. And when you graduate, you're still going to be a barista at Starbucks. And just there's not, and I'm not saying anything bad about art. I just know that with the job market and the way it is here in 2023, I mean, we were a few hundred years ago, artists, poets, those were the ones who were making really good livings. But some of these majors just aren't going to give that money back. So you're going to graduate with a lot of debt, and you're going to have a really steep uphill battle before you can pay that off, and with not a lot of income power. So can we have this? I know it's a hard conversation, but can we have this beforehand so people can anticipate what to do, or maybe think of alternatives, even saying, hey, maybe if I just go to community college for a couple of years, I'm still passionate about art, but now I have a plan on how I'm going to pay for it. I understand my limits, and so I can't have a ton of debt because it's going to be really hard to pay off. Have those kinds of conversations. And then also, I think I might have said this before, but there are some students who frankly should just get a trade. They don't even need to go to college. The social norms say you should go to college, and that's what everyone does. That's what everyone has to do, but that's not necessarily true. You could go electrician, plumber, AC, heating, cooling. These guys are making per hour just as much as a lawyer sometimes, and you don't have to go through that really hard process of getting a degree, or a bachelor's degree, and taking on debt for something that is not a good fit for somebody's learning style and somebody who just needs to be working with their hands on a craft. So again, I wish we were out on the front lines a little bit better identifying this. But all I'm trying to say here as well is this is just-in-time learning. And I'm really passionate about trying to figure out those points, not only for high school students, but think about people making home purchases when they realize, well, here's my final monthly payment that I'm going to be making. Most people, myself included, don't really know that until the very end when you're closing on a house. And we walk into these things going, oh, I think I know what I'm getting into, but then you're sitting down at closing and that's when they reveal those final numbers to you. How are you going to walk out of there? It's way too late to have that learning and that kind of, or say, well, we need to give you all this information for transparency. Well, I'm not going to stand up and go, hey, we can't sign on this because it's too expensive, you're just stuck. So that's what we're saying. Just-in-time learning needs to be right in time. Couple more things here. Why do people look at their portfolios daily? Why do they perform worse than others who don't? And this is a slight sidestep. There's two reasons. One is myopic loss aversion. And I'm coming back to this from a previous podcast because those who are looking at their portfolio every day, and we're watching CNBC, I got my TV behind me every day, it was a good excuse to come up with an Excel spreadsheet. I just ripped the last performances for the last 900 days on the S&P 500, and I came up with how many times did it close negative. Because I thought certainly markets usually go up, so maybe it's like 30-35% are down days. It was 47.7% negative decline days. And so if you're watching CNBC every day or watching the market every day, that is 422 chances out of 900 to have an emotional response based off of our loss aversion. And we're saying this is why people perform worse when you're paying more attention. And they think they have more knowledge, but sometimes the more knowledge is to turn a blind eye and let it play out over a longer period of time. One other thing, we're going to talk, I have a whole podcast devoted towards what we call the disposition effect. It's our tendency to sell winning stocks too early and hold on to losing stocks too much. We mentioned this before. I'm going to save that for a whole separate one because there's a trading strategy involved that we're going to use to eliminate that bias as well. One final thing is we're learning about ourselves is understanding our budgeting personality. Our budgeting personality. So there's a quiz here that I'm going to read to you. And they are choose statements that best describe you. And you can go and this is question number 1 out of 7. You actually enjoy balancing your budget, or you would rather watch bad infomercials than balance your budget? Which one is you? I know which one I am. Number 2, rules are important and should be followed, or rules are more like suggestions. It's okay to bend them a little bit. And this one I struggle with, but you choose yours. Number 3, you're always on time, or you're always 15 minutes late, fashionably, of course. You're always on time, or you're 15 minutes late. I know which one I am as well. I'm there. Number 4, recipes are an exact science and should be followed precisely. Or number 2, your idea of a recipe is a pinch of this and a pinch of that. Precise, or a pinch of this or a pinch of that. Number 5, clutter drives you crazy. Or it's not clutter, it's character. Number 6, you love planning a vacation almost as much as you enjoy going on the vacation. Or number 2, getaways are for going with the flow. And then finally, number 7, you get excited when the conversation turns to budgeting, or you fall asleep anytime the word budget comes up. I will put the link below so you can actually take the course, see how you do, in case you don't capture all of this at once. But these 7 questions, if you said you like balancing your budget, give yourself a point. If you said rules are important and should be followed instead of suggestions, give yourself a point. If you are always on time compared to 15 minutes late, give yourself a point. If you believe recipes are an exact science and should be followed precisely, give yourself a point. That's 4. If clutter drives you crazy, give yourself a point. Number 6, if you love the planning process of your vacation, give yourself a point. And number 7, if you get excited when the conversation turns to budgeting, you better give yourself a point. If you are the opposite ones, you stay 0. So you should be able to come up with, out of those 7, anywhere from 0 to 7. Now, I know personally that I love balancing budgets. I love talking about budgets, so I'm already at 2 points there. And the ones, I'm always on time. That's the German experience, living in Germany. They'll make you on time. And clutter drives me crazy. That is running away from my childhood when my house was a disaster. Now my house is, keep it really tidy because I don't like the way that feels. I do love planning vacations, and only things that keep me at, so I'm anywhere from a 5 to 7, because sometimes I do feel like rules can be more like suggestions if the rules are stupid. And also recipes, if I'm following them for the first time, I'll follow them exactly, but once I get comfortable, I will start virtuosoing those as well. So anyway, but you can see I'm going to be on one end of the spectrum, but I ask my students and yourself to come up with your number, because we need to know this. These kinds of questions actually translate into what we call our budgeting personality, how we can track our finances, how we interact with our finances. And if you are on the end of 0, 1, and 2, there's nothing wrong with it. You didn't fail. You're just on the go with the flow. If you're Dave Ramsey, you might have heard him talk about free spirits. And it's a go with the flow kind of mentality. Budgets are not going to be their best friends. And so we have to have completely different conversations with individuals who fall at the 0, 1, 2, and even 3 range. On the other hand, if you have somebody who is 5, 6, 7, these are the nerds, and these are people who like to plan things and like order. Budgets are much more natural for these individuals. And when I say it's not surprising that nerds marry free spirits, what I mean by that is it's shocking when they don't marry each other. In fact, every counseling session and every couple I've met, I can't even think of one exception. There's one nerd and there's one free spirit. And it seems that the more extreme one nerd is, the more extreme the other free spirit is. And when we're talking about all of this budgeting and financial advice together, we have to understand who we are, who our clients are. Just because I'm a nerd doesn't mean that I need to expect everybody else to love budgets and to follow a budget. I have to be aware of that, and I have to understand those who aren't. We need to come up with simpler ways for people to track their money or to create a financial plan with more spontaneity in it, a little looser. Somebody on the nerd side, we can talk the same language, we can run that budget and crank the numbers and do all that fun stuff. But if you're married to a free spirit, we need to have conversations to get on the same page. And that's one thing that I've been working with Mandy, who's of course on the lower side of this, not the spectrum, but the budgeting personality free spirit side, and going, no, we're still working together as a team or as a partnership, and it's okay. I'll run the numbers because I like doing it, but we're going to sit down, wine helps, and we're going to talk about how we're doing and what we need to work, maybe even improve, or what's going well, and just get on the same page. So a lot of the work has been done from her standpoint. I'm doing what I like to do, and now we're both on the same page moving forward towards our financial goals. And then one final piece, this is the final piece I promise, is understanding this kind of goes back to our chapter 1 where we talked about our own risk, understanding our own risk, and our clients' risk tolerances. Now, there are 2 types of risk. One is subjective risk. This is a general attitude and belief towards risk. How would you like your money to grow? If you open up any sort of financial account at a discount broker, or if you have a financial advisor, they'll give you a questionnaire and say, how do you feel about your growth? What's your objective for your growth? And of course, everybody goes, well, I want my money to grow really fast. And I want it the most growth in the least amount of time. That's what we all say. And so, of course, I'll go aggressive on this. And what we don't understand, and this is our belief and subjective risk, let's let this thing grow. And, there's risk involved. Yes, so what? I understand the risk involved. Subjectively, we understand. Objectively is when it actually happens to us, when we actually experience risk. That also means when we have a loss. Objectively, how do we feel? We said we were highly aggressive when we filled in a little bubble on our questionnaire, but when we lost 20% or 30% in our portfolio in a year, were we willing to accept that risk? That's the objective risk. And that's why even in chapter 1, back many podcasts ago, that's why we asked you, we're going to talk about risk, we're going to talk about loss aversion. Here's a bet. And I didn't ask you, hey, what do you believe about this? I said, I've got $100 here. Are you willing to put up $100 for this coin flip? That gets straight to the core of somebody's objective risk. And we've also learned that could be $100 or $10,000, and our risk aversion levels or our loss aversion levels don't change very much, despite even if the amounts that we're wagering differ or get larger or smaller, our risks usually stay the same. And that's why if you are married to somebody, or if you're managing somebody's money, or managing your own money, you need to understand your own objective risks, making sure that your investments are in line with the true objective risk. And you're going to make yourself a lot happier, and you're going to make your clients a lot happier before the storm hits. And that, my friends, concludes the materials for the class. You've made it through to the end. You didn't have to take any exams. This is our free podcast. But I do thank you for listening and watching. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. You can find me on YouTube or on Instagram, brianfoltis.com. Would love to serve you in any way possible. So please let me know how I can do that. Otherwise, I wish you a great rest of the week, and we'll be back for more content next week, Tuesday. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.